Good evening, everyone. My name is Evelyn Culmain. I'm the Transition Manager at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. And welcome to our 2022 webinar, Educational Supports for Students with a Chronic Illness and or Disability. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Tonight we've got a jam-packed lineup of wonderful speakers from educational organisations and institutions across Victoria, commencing with Nick Miller from Elevate Education. He'll be presenting on study skills. Elliot Howe, who's a young person with a chronic medical condition, sharing his experiences on education and educational supports. Joanne Muscat from the VCAA, Helen O'Keefe from VTAC, Andrew Smith from City Len, presenting on careers and pathways. So firstly, allow me to introduce Kiri Kane, who's the manager of the Ronald McDonald Learning Program. Kiri's also been instrumental in helping to pull this evening together. And thank you, Kiri, for introducing Elevate Education.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. It is my pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Nick Miller. Nick works for Elevate Education, which is a program or an organisation that supports young people mastering study skills. So mainly secondary school. So we're very happy to have him join us today. He's going to share just a small element of their wider program. So welcome, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kiri. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone, for having me. What I actually want to do is start a little bit differently. I would really strongly encourage everyone to use the emoticons or even the chat functions throughout this sort of next 10 to 20 odd minutes as we chat through this little segment here. So any reactions are totally encouraged throughout this as we go through this. So the first question I'm actually going to put out there, thumbs up react, thumbs down react. Has anyone in this session of the about 60 odd people here seen or heard of Elevate Education before? Couple coming through. Okay, cool. Some yes, some no. I can see privately as well. Some yes, some no. Okay, cool. The one thing I want to flag from the very start here, for those who have seen Elevate, but for those who have never heard of us as well, is that first and foremost, we are a research-based company. Everything that I say and go through is based off 20 odd years of annually updated research as to how the top performing students in high school get the top marks. Now, when we ask that question, the most common answer that we tend to get, not just from students, but from parents, even a handful of teachers, and you might have heard this from your siblings or friends as well, the reason that top students get the top marks is because they work the hardest. i.e. they chain themselves to a desk and they study, study, study. They have no friends, they have no hobbies. All they do is just lock into the desk, study as long as they possibly can, and that's why they get the top marks. What we found is while that is the most common answer, there is no element of research whatsoever that points to it being true. The second most common answer that we potentially get across the board is top students, Nick, are just naturally smarter students than other students, right? They have higher IQs or they grasp information better than other students do. So these are the two most common misconceptions that we get across the board about studying or approaching studying, not just in high school, but in tertiary education, job applications as well. The hardest workers and the naturally smartest people do the best. And what I'm here to do is go through some simple strategies and habits that go against those misconceptions. The reason the top performing students get the top marks in high school and university is because they incorporate some simple strategies and habits into their routine that other students simply don't. So that's what we do at Elevate. Over the last 20 years, we've found these strategies, we've found these habits. We've put them into these sessions so we can feed them straight back to you guys. And what we're going to go through today, if you bear with me for one moment, I'm just going to share through my screen and get up a small presentation. We're going to go through the elements and the strategies and habits surrounding time management. Can I just get a couple of thumbs up to see, can everybody see this screen on here? Great, yes. Okay, cool. Awesome. So, time management. What we do predominantly at Elevate is we talk about how to study or what to do to study. We're actually going to veer away from that what to do to study, because typically speaking, teachers and mentors are very good at directing you as to what to study and what to do well in your common assessment tasks, assessments, assignments, and exams if you're sitting those as well. The more common issue that we see students face in higher levels like year 11 and 12 and tertiary education is, okay, cool, but when do I actually do this? Or when do I prioritize making time to do this? And what we've found is that the issue surrounding time management stems for similar issues as to why we might procrastinate. If you've ever butted heads with mum, dad, or a guardian before, it might be because of something along the lines of them coming into the room and being like, you should be studying right now. And you're like, I'm supposed to be on a break, or I'm just chilling out at the moment. And it's literally being like, okay, but I'm saying study, you've got to test it. And then it goes back and forth from there. It's actually a time management issue more than a study issue. So these reasons of procrastination that we go for is why students might not manage their time so well. The first reason being, and just throw a thumbs up out there if you're a student in this crowd, who can relate to this one? I'm not studying, or I'm not prioritizing my time around doing this work because I'm not motivated. I don't have the motivation, I don't have the drive right now. I don't have the motivation or the drive this month or this year it might be. That's the core reason as to why we don't manage our time or prioritize our time around study skills or studying sessions. So the general broad goal that we've come up with at Elevate is actually to get a goal. The general solution, I should say, is to get a written goal. And this is what we encourage students to do when they're lacking motivation. Let me just flag here. No solution will ever solve these problems that we have when it comes to studying. If we're not motivated, there is no solution to come out and go, cool, this is the solution. You now have all the motivation in the world. What we focus on Elevate is actually that middle ground to go, cool, this is the solution that will just make the problem better than what it is. So getting a goal lifts motivation from what it previously might have been. The second issue that students potentially face, or what we've found from the research as well, is that yes, I don't have motivation, and then all of a sudden there's all of this work to do. And it might be school-related work, it might be work that's related outside of school as well. There's a lot to do, and I'm completely overwhelmed, right? Being overwhelmed is one of these core issues, and it means basically instead of trying to prioritize and make time to do all of this work, what we find is, and I can relate to it as well, instead I'm just going to do nothing. I'm just going to sit in bed, I'm going to watch some Netflix, I'm going to fire up YouTube, whatever it might be, and do nothing instead. The solution to being overwhelmed is what we say is break the work down and write a list. So again, no solution that makes you never overwhelmed again in your entire life, but it's more focusing on, cool, how can we cut down how overwhelmed you necessarily feel? Now, these are not rocket science skills. When we say, oh, get a written goal, break the work down, write a list, these are comments that you most certainly almost would have heard before in your life a number of times. So what we focus on at Elevate is, what does that actually mean? To break the work down, to write a list, how should we approach it? When we're thinking about a goal, what does that necessarily mean? If we want to frame the problem in a more wider sense, what we've got here is a diagram that shows stress against performance. If we get overwhelmed, or if we completely lack motivation in years 11 and 12, whether it be to school-related common assessment tasks and exams, or whether it be related to anything outside of school as well, we find ourselves on the tail end or the high stress end of this stress performance curve. These solutions and how we're going to break them down and flesh them out, we're going to pull ourselves back from that high stress tail end towards that middle ground so that we can be performing at our peak in the middle there. And what we're going to focus on now is this breaking it down, writing a list in the form of what we call a weekly planner. Can I just get, I'll fire the question out to everyone here. Has anyone here, parent or student in this 60-odd people, who here has tried to make a study timetable before or written down like, cool, this is how I'm going to break down the work that I have and this is what I'm going to do in the chat function? Reactions are encouraged. Comments are encouraged. Yep, personal messages coming through as well. Yeah, some people no, have never tried it. Yes, great. So what we've found is, interestingly, about 90% of students will try to create what we call a study timetable, either because they've had to or because they want to try it, and it generally links to motivation, i.e., this is the start of this year or this is the start of this term. To minimize me being really overwhelmed, I'm going to plan out what I'm going to do and potentially when I'm going to do it as well. And of those 90% of students that try making a study timetable, 85% of them throw it out within the first 2 weeks. And it's a very simple answer as to why, right? You get motivated, you write down, I'm going to do my HASS homework here, I'm going to do my maths homework here, and my science homework here. It gets to 7:30 on a Monday evening and you realise, hey, I should be doing this work right now, but instead I completely forgot about the Bachelor in Paradise that's on right now. I'm going to go push my work aside and go and do that instead. Basically speaking, there's something better on. So what we found at Elevate and what we found that the top students do is they prioritise that stuff. Instead of going, cool, I'm going to push that to the side, I'm actually going to put that in first into the weekly planner. So it no longer becomes a study timetable or when to study or how to break down your study or work. It actually becomes about breaking down the different areas of your life and prioritising the fun stuff first. Because the core solution that we're facing here is this one, and the big benefit is this one. As soon as you're happy, you're productive. Being happy is a prerequisite of being productive. So the structures or the next points that we're going to talk about when it comes to making a study timetable or a weekly planner. Step number one, if you ever attempt to try and have a go at this, chuck in the stuff that you like first. That's what makes you happy. That's what makes you productive. Then in the gaps around that, that's when you put in things like not just your study, but your to-do list, whether that be preparing for a common assessment task, for example, or whether that be preparing for maybe a job interview. Put all of that stuff in the gaps around your fun stuff because there's nothing better on in those guidelines, in those time periods. Cool. The big misconception that we get from pretty much most students is, okay, Nick, sounds good, I understand this, but I'm not a structured person. My weeks change from week to week. I've got training on this time at this day, but the show will change in the next week. Basically, I don't want to live my life down to a minute and be held to account for it. The idea behind this weekly planner is that it is just a guide. It is not supposed to completely direct your life. It is more supposed to just give you some form of structure in these important years in the back end of high school, because having some structure is better than no structure at all. So treat it as a guide, not a rule. And then the final thing, which actually mirrors this point of it being a guide and not a rule, is if you were to, I'm actually going to choose a random name in here. Let's go with Louise here. If Louise was to say, okay, I'm going to do 1 hour of my maths homework, and that is in my weekly planner on a Tuesday afternoon, we don't want her to look at 1 hour and go, cool, I have to work for an hour. We actually want to forget that time completely. We want Louise to go, realistically, if I were to work pretty hard for an hour, what could I achieve in my maths homework? And that might be 5 questions. Louise now has to focus on those 5 questions and completely forget about that 1 hour, right? What happens, the core benefit for Louise here is motivation theory kicks in, and it's like, cool, once I get these 5 questions done, I am done. I'm out of here, I've completed it, and I can go back to doing some fun stuff as well. 9 times out of 10, Louise actually completes those 5 questions in quicker than 1 hour because the motivation theory kicks in. So instead of focusing on the time in your weekly planner surrounding your to-do list, focus on just the tasks and just have those tasks set in that time period. Once you've done those, you're done, and you'll actually find that you'll get it done in a quicker amount of time. Cool. What we've got on this final slide here is just an example of what a weekly planner might look like before any work, before any to-do list, before any study or homework goes in there. So you can see this is pretty reflective of maybe my usual week here. Bit of Netflix, bit of TikTok. I like to watch the rugby. I like to watch the NBA. That's all in there, but there's all those white or blank spots in there as well. That's where those to-do list stuff will go, because that is when nothing better is on. Cool. I'm just going to finally finish up by stopping sharing my screen and speaking directly to the camera. I've gone a little bit blurry, so I'll just quickly fix this one. Hopefully that. We're having this issue just slightly before. Okay, blurry enough, but I've only got 1 more second. So the aim of Elevate and the aim of these skills is basically, we would just like to make your life easier. What we've discussed over the last 15 odd minutes is just a small insight of what we do at Elevate and what we're about. Some of the other areas that we focus on are note-taking, memory retention, stress management, exam or common assessment task preparation, as well as a myriad of other areas as well. And the reason that Elevate, we exist, is because we provide these skills in an engaging way that is delivered by mentors who are young and have recently dealt with the stresses and the work that high school can give to students. At the end of the day, these skills and these habits are it's not about adding extra work for students. It is literally about making years 10, making year 11, and making year 12 easier for you guys and more bearable. Cool. If you enjoyed hearing about some of the things that we chatted through today, please feel free to check out our website or talk to a member of the team at Ronald McDonald House Charities. Okay, thank you very much. I'll hand it back to you, Kerry.
Terrific. That was great, Nick. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and share a little snippet of what Elevate Education does. I think it's fantastic that you have young people coaching and mentoring other young people, which I think is fantastic, and some really great easy strategies to take away with you. The reason why we had invited Elevate Education this time round is that some of you may remember an email a few months ago regarding a mentoring program and a pilot, and we asked for young people's opinions and suggestions as to what would be beneficial. We are going to be piloting with Elevate Education to provide some intense programs for young people around study skills and mentoring. So it's certainly in the development stage, so watch this space. So thank you, Nick. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Our next speaker, I'm just waiting for them to pop on. Our next speaker is actually going to be a young person by the name of Elliot Howell. Elliot was a young person, or is a young person, but was on our learning program, Ronald McDonald Learning Program in 2019, and also was one of our recipients for the Charlie Bell Scholarship. For those who are unfamiliar with the Charlie Bell Scholarship, you will receive some information around this probably in the next couple of months. This is a scholarship that grants up to $5,000 to young people who are transitioning to TAFE or university the following year. So if you are interested, it's a little bit like the SEAS application that you might hear a little bit about. If you're only in year 11 and you are not transitioning to TAFE, then this is good information to know, but you would apply the following year. and that grant can help with some of the fees. All right, so what we might do, we're just waiting for the young speaker who is having a little bit of difficulty getting on. So we might jump on to actually, Evelyn, I'll pass back to you to introduce Joe, and we'll come back to Elliot.
Thanks, Kerry. Just a reminder to the audience that's to everyone here that you have access to the question Q&A function on Zoom. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post these comments or questions on the Q&A. So I have the great pleasure of introducing Joanne Muscat. Jo has been instrumental in providing some really helpful information about special provisions over many, many years, and has partnered with us to run these sessions. So thank you, Jo. Jo is the project manager for special provisions at the VCAA. Thanks very much, Jo.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. Good evening, everyone. And again, my name is Joanne. I'm the project manager of special provision, as Evelyn mentioned, at the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity to speak to you today. Special provision is this broad umbrella term that's used to describe different forms of assistance that are available, which I'll cover in the upcoming slides. And so the underlying, sorry, can you hear me, Evelyn? I'm just wondering, I look to have some technical difficulties on my end.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Thanks for confirming. Apologies. So the underlying principle of the VCAA's special provision policy is to ensure that appropriate, fair and reasonable options are available for students to be able to demonstrate their capabilities if their learning program or their assessment is affected by disability, illness, impairment, or maybe some other circumstances. So special provision can be in place for classroom learning. It can be in place for school-based assessments or for VC examinations. If we look at classroom learning and school-based assessments, it's actually the school who is responsible for identifying students who require special provision. And while schools are not required to seek approval from the VCAA for the provisions that they choose to implement for their students, we do recommend that schools align their policies and their practices with what we would likely approve at the VCAA for external assessments. For VC examinations, including the General Achievement Test, the VCAA is responsible for determining eligibility and approval in the form of special examination arrangements that you can see on screen there, hopefully, and the derived examination score. And it's usually at this point of the presentation that I'd just like to earmark the fact that you may be able to or eligible to apply for the VTAC's Special Entry Access Scheme, which will be spoken about by another guest speaker later on, even if you don't have special examination arrangements. And I say that because it's important to note that applying for one form of special provision doesn't preclude you from applying for another. But the Special Entry Access Scheme is overseen by VTAC and not the VCAA, just to be clear on that. So if we look at what are special examination arrangements, there are adjustments that can be made to the format or procedure of a VC examination for students who may need assistance to demonstrate what they have learnt in an assessment environment. So if you believe that your ability to access examination questions or communicate your responses is impacted by your condition, you should have a discussion with your school about special examination arrangements. And our usual contact at the school is the VCE coordinator. Special exam arrangements, and I might just use an abbreviated version and say SEAs for short, because it's a bit lengthier title. They're intended to remove barriers to a student's ability to show the assessors what they know and can do. So it's the same academic standards and assessment criteria that apply. Examinations that are completed using SEAs are still marked the same way as any other examination. And so the underlying principle is that we try to ensure that provisions that are approved are fair, that they're reasonable and appropriate. It's the school who's responsible for identifying students who may require special examination arrangements and for them to then apply to the VCAA on a student's behalf. when a decision is made by the VCAA on a special exam arrangement application, it is then communicated to the school, who is then responsible to notify you of that outcome. Now, the closing date for those, I guess, long-term or chronic or known conditions was the 8th of April, but we certainly can consider late applications where there have been extenuating circumstances. So don't feel as though it's too late to apply. We have many scenarios that arise throughout the year. There are circumstances whereby students may receive a new diagnosis of a condition, that they may have a change to their condition, which necessitates additional provisions that may have been, that may need to be applied for from their original application. So if you haven't yet applied, or you feel as though there may need to be an adjustment to the provisions that have already been applied for by your school, have a chat to the school, and we can most definitely have a conversation with the school. We'd be very receptive to that. And the other thing I think is really important to mention is that we receive over 6,500 applications each year. So I guess what I'm trying to say there is, it's very common to receive applications. Don't feel as though it's unusual. With that many applications, it really is something very common. And it's good to have a support system in place. There's many provisions that might be there in place that might just be there as a support or a safety net, which we'll talk about in a moment. So what are special exam arrangements? What are some tangible examples of them? Well, here they are. So there are rest breaks, extra working time. It might include voice to text technology. It might mean a separate room, perhaps the use of a computer, maybe even taking in medication or food and drink into an examination room. So there are, on our website, there are details about a range of conditions and what potential special exam arrangements may be available. But it's, I think, very important to note that not every provision will be listed on the website. We get some very niche requests, from some very unique requests. So it's really just identifying what is necessary in order for you to be able to access and respond to an examination. And that's the primary consideration that our panel will make. If we move on now to looking at what conditions may attract special examination arrangements, it's incredibly varied. We have students applying for provisions on the basis of significant physical disabilities, language disorders, learning disorders, motor coordination disorders, vision or hearing impairments. So the conditions are many and varied. And the conditions can be acute in duration, as suggested on the slide there. So they might be, an example could be a broken arm. It could be more episodic conditions, conditions that can change. They can get better, worse, be the same. So mental health is a common one. Or they could be chronic or long-term in nature. So which provision then is appropriate? Well, it's not necessarily a case that it's a particular condition equates to a specific provision. There are some general suggestions on the website of what may be available, but there's a lot that needs to be considered. So we look at considering the impact of that condition on a student's ability to access and respond to the examination, as I mentioned earlier. And we look at what could be put in place to remove or lessen that impact. It's important to consider when looking at appropriate arrangements that they may vary depending on what is being assessed and the format of the examination. So what might be appropriate in a written, extended written response exam, like English, might be different to what's needed in a maths exam. Certain provisions may not be practical, like the use of a computer. And it's very important to trial arrangements to ensure that they will work and that they're useful in assisting in the management of your condition. The other thing I'll mention is that there has been a change to the General Achievement Test, or the GAT as it's known, for this year. It actually is being split into two sections. And that is a change from last year. So the GAT will have two sections, and section A will assess literacy and numeracy skills. And that will be approximately of 2 hours and 15 minutes in duration. And section B will assess skills in mathematics, science, technology, the arts and humanities. And there's an increased focus on what they call critical and creative thinking skills. And that assessment, or that section, is 1 hour and 45 minutes. So all students enrolled in one or more VCE or scored VCE VET Unit 3-4 sequences are required to sit both sections A and B. And students who are enrolled as a senior VCAL student will also be required to sit section A. So I want to just touch on very briefly emergency special examination arrangements. Schools can actually apply for emergency provisions for any situation that it might arise right before, maybe even on the day of an examination. So our primary concern is making sure that we have the right adjustments or right arrangements to support students to try and undertake their assessments. And so we can consider requests on very short notice for things that arise suddenly. So it's important that you're in regular contact with your school, notifying them of your needs, and the school can in turn be in contact with us to canvass what's possible in that time frame. And finally, the derived exam score is another form of special provision. The derived exam score is really about the sudden onset of an illness or an injury at the time of the examination, maybe even a personal circumstance that might occur at the time of the examination. And because of that sudden issue at the time of the exam, it might mean that your performance is unlikely to be an accurate reflection of learning and achievement that has taken place throughout the year. So it's not about compensating for any learning that hasn't taken place throughout the year, but rather something that's happened at the time of the examination. And so it's very important that we do encourage attendance at exams very strongly. We have students who may be sitting examinations in hospital with medical clearance, of course, but before making a decision not to attend an exam, if your circumstances are significant at the time, it's really important that you speak not only to, obviously to your health professional, but to the school to get an understanding as to what arrangements may be possible. A DES is not guaranteed, a derived exam score is not guaranteed. So even if it is applied for, if it's not approved, there is a risk then that there is no score given for that exam. So it's always important, and it does show a measure of good faith if students attend the exam, even if they're not feeling 100%. So you can apply for a derived score if you experience the sudden onset of an illness or injury or personal situation at the time of the exam. And you can apply whether or not you have sat your exam. But again, it's really important and does show a measure of good faith if you have attended the examination and made an attempt to do that, if it's reasonable at the time, depending on your circumstance. That's all I have. The other thing is, I suppose, is our contact information, I'm sorry. So whilst I've encouraged you all to have a chat to your school, you're quite welcome to give us a call. We'd be happy to answer any of your queries. There's a phone number, email address on screen, and there's a link also to our website if you'd like some further information. Thanks, Evelyn.
Thank you, Jo. Apologies. Thank you, Jo, for sharing that very important information. If special provisions is something new to you, please make sure that you touch base with your Year 11 coordinator or Year 12 coordinator, because if your health is impacting your capacity to fairly complete that assessment, then you really do need to have that conversation to ensure that those provisions are in place. And as Jo said, if you actually have special provisions, it's really important for you to be practicing that and making sure that they're working for you. I'd like now, thank you, Jo. I'd like now to reintroduce Elliot. So Elliot, thank you very much. I know that you were rushing from a meeting that was running late at work, so I do appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. So as I was saying, Elliot is a former RMLP student and a recipient of the Charlie Bell Scholarship from 2019. Elliot was diagnosed with Ramson's encephalitis, which resulted in some significant neurosurgery in year 10. I'm going to leave the rest to Elliot to share his experience and the impacts on his schooling, what he's currently doing now, and his future ambitions. So thank you, Elliot. Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here today. My name is Elliot. My school experience was very disrupted due to illness, and I'm hopeful that this experience can allow me to share some helpful tips with you. Until I was 9, I had a reasonably unremarkable education experience. I had friends, played violin, and took taekwondo classes. I had no reason to anticipate any of that changing. It was during a taekwondo class, however, that I had my first seizure. Sorry, I was trying to figure out my camera then. Very unfamiliar with Zoom. It was terrifying. I knew what was happening around me, and yet I couldn't respond to it. My body was no longer obeying my mind. 11 years later, that's what I remember most: fear. Doctors initially dismissed the event as a one-off. It was a hot summer, and it was likely just dehydration. Unfortunately, this was proven wrong when a few weeks later, I had another seizure. My pediatrician tentatively diagnosed me with childhood epilepsy. He could manage it with medication, and I would grow out of it. I underwent a barrage of tests, and my peaceful school life started to drift away. I had to travel interstate for most tests, and it was during a visit to Melbourne that a neurologist informed my mum that I did not have childhood epilepsy. I had a progressive brain disease called Rasmussen's encephalitis. In short, half of my brain was dying by attacking itself. Over time, I would lose strength on the left side of my body, and the seizures would worsen. For nearly 7 years, I trialed different medications and yo-yoed in and out of hospital. I stopped attending school, my brain no longer able to take in new information without triggering seizures. I completely withdrew socially, too scared to have seizures in front of anyone. At the age of 15, I had major brain surgery. Surgeons disconnected half of my brain in order to stop the seizures. It worked, but at a cost. As half of my brain was no longer functional, I was partially paralyzed and left vision impaired. Sorry, just shuffling my notes. Don't remember a lot of this. I needed to return to school, but in order to do that, I needed to relearn to walk. Returning to grade 11 was a massive step for me. I walked onto campus and immediately started crying. The impact of my time off suddenly seemed so real. I started out with a plan: take 3 subjects and leave 2 study lines free so that I could have more quiet time. This was hugely important at the time because I was way too easily fatigued to study a full load of subjects. If I needed to study, I would be able to, but if I needed to slow down and take a break, I would also have time for that. I gained more energy during the year and increased the level of one subject. I started out taking it at a lower level, which was not counted towards ATAR. I felt, however, that as I adjusted and recovered, I was capable of more. That is my biggest piece of advice to anyone undertaking study. Do what's right for you. It doesn't matter if someone else doesn't have any study lines or won't be satisfied with anything less than perfection. You are unique, and so are your needs. Socializing was honestly really difficult for me once I returned to school. Everybody already had friends, and I didn't know any of them. I was also very out of practice after spending so long isolated. I completely ignored my fatigue and stress, joining every single club and committee available to me. I wouldn't do that again. What actually happened was I exhausted myself. However, as much as I was overzealous in my approach, everyone at school knew me, and that meant they knew how to support me. Connecting with people was so important for me during school. In grade 12, I had a small group of friends and was settling into a study routine. None of that would have been possible if I hadn't learned how to advocate for myself. Speaking up about what I needed was definitely a learned skill, but an essential one. In grade 12, my school decided they were going to ban the use of mobile phones. My rehab team had taught me to get through the school day using my phone to assist my damaged executive functioning. As that part of my brain had been disconnected in surgery, I really didn't have a choice. I emailed every teacher I saw regularly and informed them that I would be continuing to use my phone. If I had not done this, my school experience would have dramatically worsened. I used my advocacy skills to spread awareness, but they are also essential in everyday life, especially in education settings where people may not understand your needs, but you are still expected to perform at the same rate as people without disabilities. It is so important to be able to say what you need. Don't be afraid to do that. Completing school was really a juggling act between listening to my own body, speaking up when I needed help, and trying to get decent grades. A massive help in this was my after-school tutoring through the Ronald McDonald organisation. I got biology tutoring once a week, and the subject that I had initially really struggled with became my favourite subject. Speaking up was really the only thing that achieved this. So learning to advocate for myself was the best thing that I could have done in grades 11 and 12. Sorry, just lost my place. Focus on what matters for you. It may not be getting good marks. It might be getting good marks. It may be building skills outside of that you know you can take on to your next goal. For me, advocacy has been a major part of my journey. And I think that's genuinely a skill that I only learned out of necessity during school. Whatever school means for you is valid. Your personal experience cannot be defined by anyone else. And although there will be some requirements to meet, it is your decision what you choose to take from your experience in school. I have taken so many skills from school, and very few of what I actually consider to use in my everyday life are the ones that classes taught me. It's more been about socialising, learning how to plan, learning structure, and learning to advocate for myself. So my biggest message to anyone going through school is to focus on what they can take into their own personal goals in the future. And I'd like to open up to any questions about that if I could, and open a bit more of a conversation.
Thanks, Elliot. This is Evelyn from the RCH Transition Service. Thanks so much for your presentation. I wonder, just in the interest of time, are you able to stay till the end of the seminar so we can answer some questions?
Yes, I am.
You might have. Thank you so much. Elliot, I really enjoyed your points around advocacy and speaking up when you need to maximise and optimise the supports that you can access. And I love that your statement around you are unique and so are your needs. I think that's something that everyone will take away from your presentation, and just to say what you need. So thanks so much, Elliot, for your time and for sharing your insights and expertise and your personal experience. So Elliot's available at the end of the session. If you've got any questions, please pop that in the Q&A. But thanks again, Elliot. Can I introduce our next speaker? Helen O'Keefe is the Senior External Relations Coordinator from VTAC, and she'll be presenting to us on the Special Entry Access Scheme. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks very much, Evelyn, and thanks to everybody who came along tonight, and for the organisers for inviting me. I'm very thrilled to be here to talk to you a little bit about applying for tertiary study and special consideration, or as we call it, SEAS, S-E-A-S, here. So I will get started. So one of the big questions that we get asked is actually, what is VTAC and what do we do? So VTAC is a not-for-profit agency that's owned by all of the universities and most of the TAFEs and colleges in Victoria. And essentially we process course applications, both for unis and TAFEs. So whether you're wanting to apply for perhaps a diploma or a degree, you are very likely to have to apply through us. We also handle the SEAS application. So that's the Special Entry Access Scheme, which is the big special consideration program offered in Victoria. And it allows selection officers to consider educational disadvantage when they're making course offers. We also collect scholarship applications on behalf of many institutions, including scholarships that relate to equity and disadvantage. And we also calculate the Australian Tertiary Admissions Rank, or ATAR, for Victorian students. So what this means for you is that if you're looking to apply to a number of different institutions, you can do so all in one application. You can apply for special consideration there and for scholarships as well. So it's really a bit of a one-stop shop for students who are applying for tertiary study. So in tonight's session, I'm just going to run through the VTAC timeline to give you an idea of when everything is happening. If you're not in Year 12 this year, if you're in Year 11 or Year 10, it's still handy for you to know because our timelines run pretty much the same each year. I'm going to talk to you briefly about researching courses and checking that you're eligible, creating a VTAC account and applying for courses, applying for special consideration, SEAS and scholarships, a couple of handy hints, and where you can get some help and extra information. So our VTAC applications will open this year on the 1st of August, and timely applications, so the earliest application close is the 29th of September. And we always encourage people to get their applications in by that date because that's the date where you pay the lowest fee. So it's $44 this year to apply through VTAC. You then have until the 7th of October, so another 8 days after the close of applications to submit your SEAS and scholarships applications. For those of you doing Year 12, you'll receive your ATAR on the 12th of December this year, and you'll have a couple of days to change your preferences, given that you'll understand what your ATAR is, what you're dealing with. You'll probably want to connect with your careers practitioners and teachers, maybe even connect with the institutions and make your final decisions about how you would like your preferences to be. Then on the 21st of December, we will run a December offer round. So we introduced December offers in 2019, but due to COVID, we haven't been able to have them for the last couple of years. So they're coming back this year. So it's very likely if you're applying this year that you'll know what course you've been offered before even the Christmas comes around. So you'll be able to have plenty of time to get yourselves organised. The January offer round will then run on the 13th of January, and then we run 3 other offer rounds during February. So there's quite a lot of opportunity to receive offers into courses. So all the information you need, you can find on our website. We don't do any printed materials anymore. So you'll see on our website there on the top, there's lots of information about getting prepared, how to apply, talking about the different access schemes and scholarships. And at the bottom there, there's tabs leading you to the application, to where to find courses and where to research the different institutions. So there's a whole range of guides in amongst the website that will be very useful to you. We've got dedicated information for years 10, 11 and 12 that's tailored particularly to those year levels. We also have a range of downloadable PDFs, fact sheets, cheat sheets. There's also a number of videos and animations that are quite useful as well that can talk you through the different processes of what you'll need to do. And there's 2 PDF guides there that are very useful to download. One's called Researching Tertiary Education. So that's useful for any students, no matter what year level you are, to find out a bit about researching what you might like to do. And the other one there, the How to Apply guide, is very useful to Year 12 students because it really deals with all the things that you need to be thinking about applying for courses, SEAS and scholarships. Now, the main tool that you will use if you're applying through us is something called VTAC Course Search. So that is course information for all of the tertiary institutions around Victoria. You can search in a number of different ways on that. You can filter by institution. So if you're interested in studying at one particular place, you can see everything they have to offer. You can search on qualification level. If you want to do a diploma or a degree, you can search by that. If you are interested in a particular area of study, you can search by that. So if you're interested in science, if you put science into the search button, you will find all the institutions that offer different levels of courses in science. Just a caution at the moment, if you're keen to go away and start researching courses, we're currently in the middle of our mid-year intake. So there's only a limited number of courses showing on Course Search at the moment, because they're just the ones that are available to students to commence second semester. The updated listing for 2023 will appear in July, when we'll have all our courses available. If you are interested to go in and have a little look now, you can go to our tab, that's the Find Courses tab, and then if you look down there, you can see Course Search 2021-2022 archive. So that shows you all the courses that were offered this year. So it gives you an idea of, you know, the broad range of courses that are on offer, or you can wait for a couple of weeks until July and go into the 2023 courses and see everything that's going to be offered for next year. So once you've found your area of interest and you've had a look around Course Search, there's a few different areas of the course entries that you need to have a look at. So the first one is the course design. That's just the general information about the course. What's it about? What sort of qualification is it? What will you learn? What majors will you study in that course? All of those sorts of things that will help you work out whether the course is right for you or not. The second really important thing to have a look at is the essential requirements and admissions criteria. So they're the things that are telling you what you have to do to get into that course. You know, are you doing the right subjects to be able to get into that course? And the last thing there is the ATAR profile. So that really gives you an indication of how competitive it is to get into the course, if it is a course that takes the ATAR into consideration. So just giving you an idea of what kind of ATAR level you're looking at to have a possibility of getting into the course. So just talking about those essential requirements and admission criteria. So they can include prerequisite studies. So they're studies that you must complete to be considered for the course. So if you're applying for something like engineering, you'd probably have to have high level maths and perhaps physics or chemistry to be able to be considered for that course. Essential requirements for selection and application are additional requirements that you may need to undertake to be considered. So for example, if you were thinking about applying for a performing arts course, you might have to arrange to do an audition. If you were thinking about applying for a fine art course, you might have to arrange a time to go in and show a folio. So these are other things that you need to complete to be considered for the course. Other admission criteria can be sort of optional considerations. So you'll often see subject adjustments referred to. And what subject adjustments are is when the course will give you a little bit of a bonus for having done some subjects in year 11 and 12 that are related to the course. So not all courses do them, but some will. So for example, if you were applying for a science course, they might give you some consideration because you've done 3 or 4 science subjects in year 12. So it's different to prerequisites. You don't have to have done them as you do with prerequisites, but they're things that they might say, well, you've done course subjects that are associated with our course, so we will give you a little bit of extra consideration for that, maybe 1 or 2 points on your aggregate score. And the last thing there is essential requirements for enrolment or graduation. So these aren't things that you need to get into the course, but they are things that you will need to complete after receiving an offer. So for example, if you are undertaking a childcare course, you might need to do a working with children check. Or if you are undertaking a nursing course, you might need to have certain immunisations. So they're things that you don't necessarily need to get into the course, but you will definitely have to do once you're in the course. The last thing we look at is the ATAR profile. So this information just helps you understand how competitive it is to get into a course that selects on the ATAR. As each year is competitive, we can only go on the previous year's ATAR to get an idea of what you're looking at to actually get into a course. And there's a lot of numbers there and a lot of information. But to keep it simple, the best thing to do is to look at the lowest selection rank. That gives you the best indication of what sort of ATAR you're going to need to get into the course. Lots of people want to look at the lowest ATAR. And they'll say, well, but I got more than 49.3, so why didn't I get into the course? When you look at the lowest ATAR, that might just be one person in that course who had loads of special consideration put in on top of that to push them up the selection ranks. So that's why it's really important to just look at that lowest selection rank as an indicator of what you'll need to get into the course. So creating your account, you can do that for Monday, the 1st of August. You'll need a few personal details to create your account, including your student number or your IB number, and a unique student identifier. So if you're a current year 12, we need your student number so that we can access your results later on from the VCAA. You'll also need the unique student identifier or USI before you can create an account. That's a government requirement and we just collect that on behalf of the government. If you don't have a USI, just go to the USI website. It's quite easy to set it up and every student needs one. So you can do that any time before you are applying for VTAC. Once you've started that account, you can manage all aspects of your application through the account. So you'll see there's all sorts of tabs to go in and, submit course application documents or submit your season scholarship documents. One thing to note is the little envelope up the top there. That's where we will send you messages and reminders and things like that. So it's always worth checking that throughout the process of applying, although most of those are also copied into your email. So just keeping an eye on your email during the application process is a really good idea because we do send a lot of reminders and information to you. Just a hint there, you can select an authorised nominee to act on your behalf when you're preparing your application through VTAC, and we think that's a really good idea. So if you have a parent or a carer or a supporter who can be an authorised nominee, they can call up and make an inquiry on your behalf. If you haven't nominated anybody, we can't speak to anybody who rings up and wants to ask about your application. So you do need to have nominated somebody for us to be able to speak to them. If mum rings up and starts asking questions, we can't talk to her. Another thing we're hoping to do this year also is to send information to those authorised nominees. So just information saying, hey, the applications close on this date or the C's applications close on this date, just so they might be able to remind you if you've not completed those tasks. So just to make sure, we hate it when people miss out on deadlines and opportunities because they've missed an email somewhere. So we're really trying to make sure that everybody gets all the information they need and gets everything done on time. When you apply for courses, you have the opportunity to list up to 8 courses. They can be from the same institution or all different sorts of institutions. If you take nothing else away from my talk tonight, and I know it's a lot of information, the most important thing to remember is to always list your courses in the true preference order that you want them. So dream course number 1. If you didn't get into that course, what would be your second preference? If you didn't get into that course, what would be your third preference, and so on? Because for each offer round, you'll receive a maximum of 1 offer, and that will be the highest course that wants to make you an offer. So you'll never find out about the lower courses. So you really need to make sure that you put your courses in the true preference order that you want them. You do have an opportunity to change and move your preferences around. You can do that, every day between when you set up your application and when the preferences close in December. You can also change your preferences between offer rounds. So if you were offered, say, your third preference in the December offer rounds, you can accept that preference and you'll still be automatically considered for preference 1 or 2, or you can move your accepted preference down the list and put a whole lot of other preferences up above it if you wanted to. So you'll always be considered for anything that's above the preference that you got. Just beware, some courses have what they call an early closing date. That early closing date is usually the timely closing date for VTAC, which is the end of September, but it means that you can't add that course after that time, or you can't take it off your list and then try to re-add it. Courses that come to mind are Monash Medicine, and I think the VCA arts courses are like that as well. So just be careful with that. If you're just moving courses around, we'd advise you to just use the arrows, arrow up and arrow down, rather than taking a course off and then trying to put it back on again. You can also opt into supplementary offers, which is a really good idea as well. So what supplementary offers do is, if you, for some reason, don't get an offer into any of the courses you've applied for, if you've opted into supplementary offers, that gives VTAC the permission to provide your details to any institutions that have got spare places available. So if you don't get anything that you've applied for, you might get an offer from another university or TAFE saying, hey, we've got a place in this course, are you interested? So it's just a bit of a safety net and something that's worth considering. Okay, applying for special consideration. So special consideration provides consideration for circumstances that have impacted your studies. And as I mentioned before, one application will cover all of your preferences and all of your course applications. So CEES allows selection officers at the institutions to grant special consideration for course entry, and it can be applied differently by different institutions or different courses because they all have their own policies and rules. CEES is confidential, so you'll never know how much you get because it's applied differently, you know, for all different institutions. And a point worth making is that CEES will never disadvantage you. So we do sometimes have students who don't want to divulge perhaps mental health issues or something because they think the university won't want them or the TAFE won't want them if they divulge that. That is never going to be the case. CEES will never disadvantage you, and everybody should apply for it if they think they're eligible for some consideration or they have been impacted in their studies. So what CEES can and can't do. So CEES may allow you to gain entry to a course with a lower ATAR than otherwise required. What it doesn't do is it doesn't exempt you from completing essential requirements. So you still need to meet any prerequisites or interviews or tests or all those sorts of things I talked about before in the requirements. You still have to do those. And CEES isn't a guaranteed entry scheme or a reserved quota or anything. So just be aware of that. So just a little example on the side there of how CEES can impact. So you see there we've got 6 students vying for 4 places. You can see with the green envelopes, they're the students who got access to those places. So students who had no CEES, their ATAR, like Taylor up the top, their ATAR of 95 was also their selection rank. But you can see down here, Ashton, his ATAR was 75, but he had quite a significant amount of CEES, 11 points in fact, which pushed him up to a selection rank of 86. So it meant that Ashton actually got a place over Yoshi, who got an achieved ATAR of 80. So you can see there how it can push you up the selection ranks and get you into a course that you might otherwise not have had access to. So after you have applied for courses on VTAC, the CEES application will be available to you. We always advise students to submit their CEES application early. You can go backwards and forwards in and out of it and you know, tweak it and change it as you go before the closing date. It does close on the 7th of October, and that is a hard close. So you do need to have everything completed by the 7th of October. So if you do need to gather any evidence or supporting paperwork, it's a really good idea to get started on that early. If you are planning on posting your information into us, you do need to make sure that it gets in, you've given plenty of time for postage so that it does get in before that 7th of October deadline. We have something called the CEES advisory date, which is the 16th of September, and that's a really fantastic service. So if you can get your CEES application in and completed by the 16th of September, our staff will review it and let you know if there's anything missing or if you photocopied the wrong side of the paper or something like that, giving you a couple of weeks until the 7th of October to fix it up and resubmit. So that's a fantastic service worth considering. And it just gives you peace of mind that you know that you've done the best Cs application that you possibly can. So there are 4 categories of Cs. The first one is personal information and location, and everybody should apply for that. Category 2 is disadvantaged financial background. 3 is disability or medical condition, and 4 is any other difficult circumstances that have impacted your ability to study at your best. So category 1 really just takes into consideration the information that you provide as your personal information on your VTAC application. So you don't need to provide any documentation there. So it might take into account, you know, your living or school location. If you're regional or rural, you might get some consideration. If you've gone to an underrepresented school, you might get some consideration. If you're the first in the family to attend university, if you an Indigenous Australian, you might get some recognition. So everybody should apply for category 1 because all the institutions have different things that they will take into account. So there's no paperwork needed. It's as simple as ticking a box. The box actually is already ticked these days. You just need to activate it. So please keep that in mind and make sure that you do apply for category 1. Category 2 is financial disadvantage, and generally that's when the student or the family is in receipt of Centrelink benefits. So if you as a student have your own CRN, you can provide that to VTAC and we can access your information straight from Centrelink. Most likely for Year 12 students, you'll usually be your parents will be receiving the benefit. So in that case, you will need to provide some documentary evidence of that. And in some cases, people will have financial hardship but won't be receiving any benefits. And in that case, what you would need to do will be to write an impact statement. So you as the applicant write a statement of how that's impacted you, and then have somebody provide a statement of support. So it might be, I don't know, the family accountant, or it might be the business manager at school that knows, you know, what the situation is with your school fees or whatever, to be able to write a supporting statement for you. And just a little hint there, please don't send anything to us with tax file numbers attached. We are not an authorised agency to accept tax file numbers, so we'd have to return the document to you. So please make sure you cut it out or you know, black it out if you're sending something that has a tax file number. Usually things don't. Okay, category 3 is disability or medical condition. And in this case, you need to provide an impact statement saying how the condition has impacted your studies, and a statement of support from a health practitioner. And that's whoever you're working with. It might be a GP, it might be a physio, a psychologist, counsellor, specialist, whoever it is. It's really important to get these things organised early to ensure that the statements of support are ready before the closing date. You can't ring your psychologist the night before and say, hey, can you write this supporting document? So you can really be thinking about that now and starting to get things organised. The final category there is difficult circumstances, and that's basically anything else that is beyond your control, that isn't covered in a previous category, and that has affected your life. So some examples of that might be a disrupted living situation, maybe the illness or death of a friend or family member, natural disasters, bullying, anything like that can be part of that. And generally students will be required to write an impact statement and get a statement of support from a responsible adult. And we have the definition of responsible adult on our website, but it's somebody over 21 years of age who isn't related to you and doesn't live with you, but understands the situation. So often it will be perhaps a school counsellor or a careers practitioner at school, or your VCE coordinator might be the sort of person who can provide that information. We also have some situations that have streamlined evidence requirements. So for students who have been impacted by homelessness, sexual assault, family violence, or formal out-of-home care, they're not required to write an impact statement or get a statement of support. If they're working with an agency, maybe a sexual assault agency or a homelessness agency, they can just get a letter from that agency to say what the situation is, and it will be accepted. They are welcome to write an impact statement and statement of support if they want to, but they don't need to. Refugees and asylum seekers also, when they give us information about their visa, sometimes that will be enough, and in other times they will need to write an impact statement or statement of support. So just some notes on SEAS documents. So where SEAS documents are required, an impact statement is written by you, the applicant, on the SEAS application form in your VTAC account. And the statement of support is written by the relevant responsible person. So whether that's a healthcare professional, as in category 3, or someone else, depends on what the situation is. If you've got multiple conditions, you can provide multiple statements of support. So impact statements that don't have an accompanying statement of support won't be considered. So where we're asking for those two, where we're asking for an impact statement and a statement of support, you need both of those things for that impact statement to be considered. What's really important about the impact and supporting documents is that they should include how the circumstances have adversely affected your ability to study and perform your assessment tasks at your best, your access to educational resources, your attendance at school and tuition. So a good statement is personal and sincere, quite succinct, and it should explain the context, date and impact of the disadvantage on your studies. So we're really interested in how your studies have been affected. We're not interested in the ins and outs of the actual medical condition. It's more important to know how it's impacted your studies. There's a good cheat sheet that you can download from our website, and that's a good one to give to your perhaps medical professional to give them a bit of background if they're going to be writing your statement of support. Tells them what SEAS is and tells them a little bit about what they should do and what they need to prepare for your statement of support. You can provide your documents to us, either upload them directly into your VTAC account, which most people will do. They'll upload a PDF for other documents. You can also activate an online statement of support. So you do that through your account as well, where it sends it straight to your, say, medical practitioner, and they just fill in their information that goes straight into your account. Or good old-fashioned hard copy, you can post information into us, but you do need to make sure that you've got your, in your account, there is a cover sheet that you can download to put on your hard copy, and you need to make sure that you do that if you're going to post it in. And as I mentioned before, ensure that there's plenty of time for the post to get to us. VTAC also collects scholarship applications for many institutions, not just scholarships for academic performance, but there's a lot of equity scholarships available as well that have similar documentation requirements to SEAS. So please have a look at those. We always advise students to apply for everything because you never know what you might get. There is a big list of scholarships on the VTAC website, including some that don't come through us actually, and which require their own separate application, but it's always worth investigating. And I'm just going to finish with a couple of handy hints. Make sure that you carefully check the course requirements before you apply for everything, so you don't miss any tasks, like if you have to register for a test or attend an interview. Apply early. You can update your application and add to it as many times as you like before the closing date, and make sure you start your SEAS application as soon as you can, because it might take a while to update the documentation. Lots of support from us there. We have real people in our call centre who will speak to you. You'll never get a robot at VTAC, so we're always happy to connect with you through email or talking on the phone. And we also have a range of other application webinars coming up if anybody's interested. So I will finish there, and thank you all for listening. Thanks, Evelyn.
Thank you very much, Helen. That was immensely informative. And what we might do is save the questions to the end. We've got a couple of great questions for you too. So can I introduce our last and final speaker, Andrew Smith from City Len. Andrew has years of experience as a careers counsellor, and we welcome Andrew to share his insights. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. Now I'm here to talk about careers and pathways. As Evelyn said, I'm an experienced careers teacher and spent 40 years with the education department. And when I talk about careers and pathways, I really want to take a really broad approach to it, because to me, a career is much more than just a job. Okay, it's something that you do throughout your lifetime, and people's family circumstances change during their lifetime. So sometimes, you know, being a parent is part of your career. Being a brother, sister, it's all those things are part of the career journey. And things like leisure time, hobbies, sports, we need to consider all those when we're talking about a person's career. And the other aspect of a career is often volunteering can play an important part too, and it can often lead to other things as well. So I really want to talk about careers and pathways as a journey. People may start thinking about a particular job, particular pathway that they want to follow, but the reality of life is that things change. The world of work is changing all the time as well. And so most young people who are in school now will have 7 or 8 different careers in a lifetime. And over that, they could have 15 to 20 different jobs. So we really need to make sure we prepare people for a journey that can take them to all sorts of places. Now, the first thing to look at is obviously the school pathways, which will just hopefully bring up the next slide, which is not working at the moment. So just seeing what's happening here. I think, there we go. Okay, so school pathways. And what I need to mention too is that those pathways are changing. From next year, VCAL no longer exists, and it's being replaced with the VCE vocational major. And there's also a third certificate, which is the Victorian Pathways certificate. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about each of those, but obviously those pathways lead you through to a whole range of different post-school options, which could include university and TAFE. It can include apprenticeships, workforce, but for some people it might also include a gap year of volunteering. So there's a lot of different combinations that we need to look at there. Okay, well, with the Victorian Certificate of Education, most people are familiar with the VCE, so I don't want to dwell too much about that, but the main things to remember are that every student does need to do some form of English as part of the VCE, and it's a minimum of 16 units. So 8 units from units 1 and 2, the traditionally year 11, and 8 units from units 3 and 4. And that particular pathway is a direct pathway into a range of different options. So by doing the VCE, you will get an 8R score, which will allow you entry into university and also TAFE. But as we've said before, there's a lot of different pathways into all of those things. So we want to cover those. Now, as I mentioned, VCal has finished this year, and so it's replaced by the VCE vocational major. And to some extent, some things haven't changed very much, but it does mean that there's a lot more options for students studying the vocational sort of major. It gives them access to a whole lot of VCE subjects that sometimes they wouldn't have had access to as part of the VCal. And to me, I think it's a great improvement. It means that VCal is seen, or what was VCal is seen as on par with the VCE. So, and that's one of the reasons why it's made that change, because for some time, people have sometimes seen things like VCal as an easy option for students, and it certainly isn't. It's just another way of learning, and so it's great that it's been integrated into the VCE. Now, the main difference between the VCE vocational major and VCE is it is an applied learning course, so it is much more hands-on, and you do a lot of practical work-related experience. Within the VCE vocational major, students do select a VET course, a vocational education training course, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. And you also do work placements, which for some people, that's a real advantage to actually be able to get out into the workforce over the 2 years of the VCE vocational major. And some people will also do a school-based apprenticeship as part of that as well. So actually spending a lot of time on the work in the workplace and actually earning money at the same time. Now, if you are doing the VCE vocational major, you do need to select either a VCE English or a literacy subject, same with maths or numeracy. You do work-related skills, personal development skills, and then some other Unit 3 and 4 sequences, which means if you have a love of art or music, you can maybe bring some of those in, or maybe one of the VET subjects. So the VCE vocational major is a minimum of 16 units over the 2 years. And every school is going to be a little bit different in how they actually structure that. And the vocational major course is a direct pathway into TAFE apprenticeships work. And you can still get into universities, but through a different pathway, which we'll talk a little bit about in a moment. Now, the third option is the Victorian Pathways Certificate. Now, this is a new certificate, and it probably equates to the old VCAL Foundation studies. And so it's for students who are not ready to take on the other 2 forms of VCE, and 12 units over usually 2 years, but it can actually be done over 3 years. And again, it's combining studies of literacy, numeracy, work-related skills, personal development. And for most schools, it's going to be offered on an as-needs basis. So depending on the student, if they're not ready to tackle VCE, this might be a great option. Some schools may even offer it at year 10 level, so that students can actually study the Victorian Pathway Certificate over a 3-year period. But this is all fairly new, and schools are really going to be adapting to all of this over the next couple of years. And that Victorian Pathway Certificate can provide a pathway directly into TAFE apprenticeships and other forms of work. Now, I mentioned VET before, so vocational education and training. It's a fully integrated part of the VCE and also the VCE vocational major. If you're doing the vocational major, you must do a VET subject. If you're doing VCE, it's an option for you. And it's a great option because by doing a VET subject, you're doing a subject that you're going to get a certificate, which equates to TAFE, and it's a great entry level into TAFE. And if you do later, say you did a certificate 2 in hospitality and then wanted to go on to further studies in hospitality, you'd be credited with what you've done already at school. So VET is a great way, not just for people who are into the more hands-on education. It's great for for VCE students as well. You know, for a VCE student who maybe wants to move into electrical work, then doing a VCE VET subject in electrotechnology, great pathway. Same with things like automotive. There's a huge range of VET subjects available, and as I said, available to both people doing the VCE and also the vocational major, and also the pathway certificate, but it's not an essential part of it. But if you are undertaking the VCE vocational major, you do need to do a minimum of 180 hours of VET over the 2 years of the course. Now, in terms of choosing which is going to be best for you, you've really got to think about who you are, your own personal circumstances. In terms of choosing actual subjects, it really needs to be what you're actually interested in and what you're good at. Some students, when they're looking at VCE, sometimes they'll look at how subjects are scaled and look at ones which they think, well, this is going to give me more of an ATAR score. But the reality is, if you're not that interested or that good at a subject, you're not going to get the study score that you would get by doing a subject that you're really, really passionate about. So if you have a passion for art or a passion for music, then they're the sorts of things that you should be looking at doing as part of your VCE or vocational major. Obviously, you need to look at things like where the subject will lead you. You know, if you've got already some ideas of particular jobs that you'd like to do, then obviously picking subjects, say if you're interested in the law, picking legal studies is obviously a good thing. If you're interested in nursing, things like human development. So you need to think about the sorts of jobs and things that you may do in the future, but keeping in mind that, as I said, your career journey will lead you to all sorts of interesting places. Whether you enjoy the subject or not, obviously that's a really, really big part of it. Make sure you're picking subjects that you're really going to enjoy, because if you're passionate about it, you're going to do really well in it. Obviously, you need to think about further training and tertiary courses. As Helen mentioned before, VTAC, there's certain courses will have prerequisites. So, you need to make sure you look at the VTAC website to have a look at what subjects you will need for particular courses. Also, whether it will lead on to a VET qualification is another important sort of consideration. But most importantly is your own personal sort of situation. Don't pick subjects or courses just based on what your friends are doing. What's most important is what's really going to suit you at this particular time in your life. Okay, now in terms of thinking about future jobs, it is important to think about employment growth opportunities because the job market is changing all the time. But just looking at the current sort of situation, so if we're looking towards next year and beyond that, there's certain areas that are going to be increasing and certain areas that will be declining. It's interesting, when this was put out, they talked about declining employment for things like agriculture, forestry and fishing. That may not be totally the case, given sort of what's happened with supply chains and things at the moment. I think there'll be a greater emphasis on securing our own sort of agriculture and forestry and fishing industry. So it may find that things will change. It's very, very hard to really predict, but the things that we can predict are those ones at the bottom there, that things like healthcare, social assistance, they're increasing all the time. So there's lots and lots of opportunities there, lots of opportunities in construction, education and training, and in a whole range of professional and scientific areas. So it's really important for you to have a look at where the growth areas are, and there's a few websites that can help you do that. So one of them is Job Outlook. It's a great government website, and you can go there, look at particular jobs. It will tell you how much you can expect to earn, but also what's going to be happening in the future and whether those jobs will be growing in the future or declining. The VTAC website, as Helen's already mentioned, there's a wealth of information there that you can be looking up your courses, looking at the subjects and things that you will need. And another great website is the My Future website, where you can actually develop a whole profile and look at the things that you're interested in, things that you're good at, all those sorts of things, the sorts of working environments that you would like to work in, and you can put all that information into the My Future website, and it will then provide a whole range of different jobs and careers you might like to consider. So at the end of secondary school, there are obviously, as we've mentioned before, lots and lots of different opportunities. I think the current government is looking at really expanding apprenticeship and traineeship opportunities. So that's certainly something that you should be considering. The employment market is obviously a very good market to get into at the moment. Employers are crying out for people in a whole lot of different industries. So there's certainly the opportunities there. And I think a lot of employers, keen to take young people on and then provide them with the training that they need. TAFE is a great pathway into a whole range of different jobs, not just the traditional trades, but in information technology, nursing, a whole lot of personal care areas. So you really should look at what's available in the TAFE area. And obviously, traditionally, university offers a whole range of different courses as well. In terms of apprenticeships, if you do want to find out more, there's a number of websites that you can use. MEGT, they have a great website to help people find appropriate pathways in apprenticeships. So that's a good one. And there's also AA pathways. But again, if you just Google apprenticeships and traineeships, there's a number of different organisations that can really help you on the way. And there's a lot of subsidies and things at the moment for employers to be taking on people into the apprenticeship trades. Okay, so that question about, are you looking at TAFE? Are you looking at universities? I mean, the first thing is to think about your ultimate goal. What is it that you want to get to? And what's going to be the best way of doing it? As we've mentioned before, many universities do require an ATAR, but there's lots of other pathways into courses, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a moment. So some of those TAFE pathways as well actually give you guaranteed entry into university, and there's some great examples of that. You need to be talking to your careers teachers in your schools. They're obviously going to be your first point of call, but there's also a lot of help at the universities and TAFEs. One of the best pathways guides is actually the Victorian University website, the vu.edu.au. They have a site there where they have a whole lot of pathway maps, so you can really clearly see the different pathways going from TAFE into university. So this is just one example, but there's so many that we could have picked out. You know, if you want to become a fully registered nurse, you could go and do a Bachelor of Nursing, but some people would prefer to actually go through the TAFE system first, and sometimes people will feel it's a more hands-on sort of option. So you could do a Cert 4 in nursing, you do a Diploma of Nursing, and the great thing about doing something like that through a TAFE is that once you've got that diploma, you can actually start going out there and working, and then later on then maybe go back to do your bachelor's degree. And over the years that I've been involved in careers counselling, I've just seen so many great examples of that. Another one would be, you know, a young person wanting to go into the police force. It's a really difficult one to get into when you're young, and so some people will do something like a TAFE course in criminal justice. So do a 1-year course, 2-year course, and through that, that will give you a direct pathway into a degree in criminal justice. And you know, I know of one young man who's now working in the police force, coming through that exact sort of pathway. So it's a great pathway for people to look at. And another thing with TAFE too is often it's a lot cheaper to do TAFE. A lot of TAFE courses are heavily sort of subsidised, so you need to have a look at what's on the free TAFE list. And sometimes by doing that, your first year or first 2 years of education may even be free, and then you're moving into a bachelor's degree later on into second or third year, and actually saving a whole lot of fees along the way. So very important to get that sort of course advice when you're looking at TAFE and university. There's lots of things you need to know. I mean, Helen mentioned before about all of those different requirements. Some do require tests, some require interviews, folios, all those sorts of things. It's good to find out about those as soon as possible, because especially things like folios, you could be doing that through year 10, year 11, year 12, actually developing those folios. So the sooner you find out what you need, and again, all of the universities have great websites around that, particularly Swinburne College. They also have a great website there in terms of planning your future, and also talk about some of the early entry programs, because more and more universities and TAFEs are actually offering students places based on a whole range of information before their ATAR comes out. So it's great to know about all of those things. Once you actually get in to a university or TAFE, there's great services there to support you. They all have student disability support services, and so there's a couple of examples there. And with all this information, we can make these slides available to you. I'm going through it fairly quickly because I know we want to have some question and answers at the end of this session. So that's just a range of some of the services that are available. So, you know, they can adjust your study conditions. They can give you different course materials, a lot of assistive technologies, and a lot of special consideration in terms of how you work, and even if you're doing work placements, you know, working close to home. Okay, well, as I said, I've sort of gone through that fairly quickly because I really want to make sure that Evelyn's got lots of time for questions, and I think all of the presenters are hung around, so you can ask questions to any of the presenters. Thank you, Evelyn.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks so much for that great presentation, and all the resources too. I think they'll be invaluable for all the students and families who are attending tonight. We are running over time, and City Len will collate the questions and responses from the Q&A, and they'll be sharing that along with the link to a recording of the webinar, and that will be emailed across to you. I wondered, Laura and Louise, if we could possibly spend a few minutes with one or two questions before we finish up, even though we are over time. Is that okay with you?
Yes, that's fine with me.
Terrific. Please, we've got some really great questions that have been popped in the chat function. Just to recap, we had Elevate Education, Nick Miller, present on study skills. That was a really dynamic session and gave us some really good tips on studying, and obviously they're a great resource moving forwards too, if anyone would like further support with study skills. Elliot presented on her experience as a young person with a chronic condition and had some really great tips and insights into managing VCE. Joanne Muscat from the VCAA presented on special provision, and there were some really good questions regarding IB, if that applied to IB students, and other matters related to special provisions. Helen O'Keefe's presentation from VTAC on special provision and scholarships, and finally Andrew Smith from City Len on careers and pathways, and a great bank of resources that we can draw upon during that time. So we do have a couple of questions. There's a particular question for Andrew around pathways for human resources, and what classes you might suggest for this, Andrew?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Obviously, yeah, the human resource area, subjects like psychology would be very important. Often people actually go into that human resource area from studying psychology at university, things like human development subjects. But for a lot of those courses, it may not have specific sort of subjects that you have to do, but the most important thing is to really look at that VTAC website and type in human resources into the course selection tool, and it will give you a whole range of different subjects. But certainly psychology would certainly be a very big one.
Thanks, Andrew. And would that the same apply to becoming a dentist too? There's another question here.
Yeah, with dentist, you really do need to check the VTAC website, because the prerequisites for a lot of the courses do change quite a bit. And obviously your science subjects are going to be really, really important there. So subjects like biology and even chemistry. So yeah, please check the VTAC website very carefully around that one.
Well, it sounds like the VTAC website is the place to go.
It certainly is for if you're looking at particular courses. Yep.
Thanks, Andrew. Helen, there were a couple of questions which you responded to, thank you, around VTAC and its applicability to other states and C's applications. Did you want to just make a small comment on that, Helen?
Yes, so it was a fantastic question about someone who has a child who's interested in applying to multiple states around Victoria, and the answer to that is that each state or jurisdiction has its own version of VTAC, its own tertiary admission centre. So if a student's wanting to apply in New South Wales, they would go through UAC. South Australia has SATAC, so they would be having to put in multiple applications around the place. So anything in Victoria comes through VTAC, anything anywhere else would go through those other TACs. And you need to be just mindful that while we're all very similar, we're all slightly different. So it's a feat of organisation to make sure that you've got all the dates right and everything if you are applying in multiple states at one time. But often students, or particularly students who are interested in something like medicine, will apply all over Australia for that, or dentistry. Yes, I think that's the answer to that. The other one was, do TAFE courses apply to Cs? It's probably best to have a look at the particular course that you're looking at. Some of the dual institutions like RMIT, who run TAFE courses, and and higher ed courses will have C. So yeah, just on the VTAC course search, you can have a look at the particular courses you're interested in, and it will say whether they consider Cs or not.
Great. Thank you very much, Helen. And Jo, you were kind enough to answer some great questions around evidence required for special provision. And so your response was great for that one. Jo, did you want to make any comment around the evidence that's required?
So generally, if provisions are along the lines of requiring rest breaks, maybe separate rooms, access to medication or food and drink, the most common form of evidence will just be, as I posted, will be a statement from the student's primary treating health professional. And normally that's completed as early as term 4 prior to the year students are completing their VCE and requiring those provisions. We do have a medical pro forma that can be completed. It asks some very specific questions, but it really depends on who's completing that evidence. So obviously we do find that applications or evidence provided by the Royal Children's is incredibly comprehensive. And so it may not necessarily need to be on our pro forma.
Great. Thank you very much, Jo.
Thanks.
And Nick, you had a question from one of our audience members around their child or young person beautifying their schedule, but not actually following it. So would you have any other sort of comments in addition to your presentation, Nick, that you'd like to share?
Evelyn, this is Kerry. Just so you know, Nick had to run off to another, another meeting.
Okay, so
yeah.
we might just skip Nick, but if there's any questions that you have for Nick, perhaps direct them to the Ronald McDonald Learning Program in the meantime, and Kiri. And is that okay, Kiri?
Sounds great. Thanks.
And Elliot, do we still have you on board?
Yes, you do.
Wonderful. Elliot, do you have any final words? There was some just great comments and commendations about your presentation, Elliot, and how useful and interesting it was for everyone. So did you have anything else that you'd like to add? Any other top tips or advice for everyone here?
I think honestly my biggest tip is just to not be afraid to reach out. I know for ages I was, and it's so much easier to get through, well, anything in life once you break that down and advocate for yourself.
Perfect. I couldn't think of a better way to finish tonight's forum, Elliot. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our presenters and particularly to the staff, Louise and Laura from City Len and Andrew, and the Ronald McDonald Learning Program team, Kiri and team, and everyone here for pulling this special event together. We had some great comments around how useful tonight was, and I hope for everyone here that it was helpful. If you have any other questions or queries following today's event, please direct